So I'll give you just a short history of this studio. So in 1996, I answered an ad in the San Francisco Chronicle when the Chronicle still ran ads for really anything. This was for 1,500 square feet of commercial real estate space in San Francisco, which wasn't rare then, it wasn't common then and is not common now in the Mission District. So I met the landlord. She was not interested on any level in having people generate noise, so I had to work on her for a couple weeks. I sent her a letter. I sent her music. I met with her many times. I wore her down. So when I took over this space, it was really a loose collective of musicians, and this was just raw warehouse space. So everything that you're seeing now, was probably the 5th or 6th or 10th or 20th thing in its place. So the revision, it's like, in some ways it's like writing code where you're just constantly, you're constantly improving the code. I mean, we discover inadequacies, anomalies, problems in all of this gear all the time. And sometimes those work for us and sometimes they don't. So sometimes we pull it and we add something else. So I think this console is probably the 5th console that was in the studio. So it's an organic work in progress. The thing is that a studio is constantly collapsing, it's constantly atrophying, and it's getting worse. Every day it gets worse. We have to. You'll notice there's holes in some of the gear. Like there's a hole right here. We send stuff out to have it retubed, rebiased, rebuilt, recapped. We're constantly working on gear, and it's like a living organism. It's in peril without constant attention. Well, remember that era when there were some DJ versus another DJ. It's like to generate some kind of excitement, like this band versus this band. That kind of structure doesn't really get you very far because first off, 30, 40 years ago, the idea of an it's like saying, you have an all food restaurant, it's, analog was, for 70 years, it was really the only option. And it doesn't, I think real day-to-day insiders, people who are just grinding out a career in audio it's probably like in the same way that political operatives don't take, the bait. They don't pick up code words like whether it's Santorum, talking about Contra stuff. They just don't. They're too inside to notice the kind of the red meat that's thrown out there to energize people who make decisions quickly and with not a lot of information. I mean the truth is that the closer you get to questions about fidelity, the more nihilistic you get and the more confused you get, because it's a lifelong process of even hearing the difference between one tape formulation or the difference between one microphone matching up with a Neve 1089 versus a Neve 33114. I mean, we could literally talk about one Neve mic pre or the different variations of St. Ives hand-wound transformers for hours upon hours. So the really interesting thing is that analog is only interesting at the very, very top end, like at the very, very highest point that it achieved. Which if you're running a studio that's open every day, it has to be like a Studer 827, 2-inch 24 track, which they stopped making in the late 90s. I have people come up to me at shows or at a conference, and they'll be like, "Man, I'm right with you. I love analog. I use this Tascam TSR8, and in my mind I'm thinking, God, man, that thing sucks, man. I wouldn't use that for my answering machine message. You know what I mean? I grew up using that thing, So I just, when you're a tweaker, you're a tweaker, and you get, maybe tweakers are lost. Maybe they're the ones that have the only insight. I have no idea. The only thing I do know is that for 15 years, I've been recording in this room, and there's been an analog 2-inch tape deck right there, and then there's been a digital hard disk system right there. And in that place, it's been an Ampex MM1000, then an Ampex MM1200 16-track, then an MM1200 24-track, then a Studer 827. And in the digital, slot, it's been early Pro Tools, it's been Radar, it's been HD, 5 or 6 different types of converters. And comparing the two is very unfair, and it's very unflattering in regards to digital, because you could probably make a case that driving through Arby's or Carl's Jr. is that you're actually eating food and that there is some kind of protein and sustenance there, but quality wise it would be no one's first choice. And I'm in an era where Studer tape decks are selling for $5,000. I'm stunned at the absolute lack of debate there is about questions of fidelity in the analog versus digital debate. And I wouldn't even say it wouldn't even necessarily need to be framed that way. Just what's a better, what's a better archiving medium? What's a better recording format? Analog's totally dead. I mean, the interesting thing is that as a medium, as a storage medium, as a recording medium, it's absolutely finished. I mean, there are a couple companies that are still, thankfully, there's ATR making tape, and ATR Services refurbishing Ampex tape decks, and they're building transformerless electronics for the 102. We have one of their rebuilt tape decks, which is phenomenal. There are companies that are, in other words, rebuilding, servicing, and tweaking out existing tape decks. No one is building a standalone analog machine. There are 2 companies making tape, and there's probably 15,000 companies making digital stuff. So, I mean, listen, we're running a museum here. I mean, we're basically in 10, 20 years, we buy, dead machines. I mean, we get parts from dead machines. There is no warehouse of Studer electronics and unused circuit boards and head stacks. It's over, and the thing is that it just one day digital's going to be fantastic. They're going to sort it all out. It's a shame how bad it is now, considering we're in 2012. I mean, I think digital film is far ahead of where digital audio is, and that's shameful, I think. And from my position, I'm offering, we're $350 a day to come in here for 10 hours. I think that I have an ethical agreement to be very, very honest about what works and what doesn't work. And it's not just recording to analog tape. It's, what microphones we provide and what compressors, and, we have 2 pianos here. What do they do? What are they even worth, putting a microphone on? I mean, I think that these are pretty big questions when that's a lot of money for a band to make, to make their own music. It's a kind of a devastating financial blow, especially in the era of, almost free content. So I do think that we have to be very honest with bands. We provide free tape now because I couldn't have the conversation. Basically listen, let's cut to the chase. We enforce tape recording here. We're one of the most unusual studios in the country. We almost insist that you record on tape and mix on half-inch tape. I am completely depressed when I see the computer screen on and when I see Pro Tools on. And you know, it's not the cheating. It's not the. I mean, actually, the only thing interesting to me about digital recording is the random access, the cheats, the ability that you have to explode song forms and completely deconstruct your music. And when bands do that, hey, more power to them. Radiohead has been my favorite band for a decade, so I don't miss the point. I'm not a roots music guy, you know what I mean? Like I'm not a literalist, but it just sounds so lousy that bands have to be at least advised of that. And what most bands do when they see their music writ out in waveforms, they get very nervous, they get very conservative, and I don't see like hand grenades being thrown. What I see is like kick drums being moved a 64th beat earlier, and I see incredibly timid and very un-rock and roll, punk. It's funny, we'll see like bands that look, they're like 1977, like they want to be like, they want to be the Sex Pistols, and they're just nervously gathered in front of a computer screen, worried about whether a snare drum's late. Am I allowed to cuss?
Absolutely.
Okay. And
purely random that GitLamp didn't have it. Random.
Wow, cool. So I watched this on and off for 15 years, and I couldn't take it anymore. I mean, there is exceptions. I think that whatever it is, I think that you have to use the potential of the medium, the full potential of really recording on a very, very good sounding 2-inch deck is that the fidelity right now can't be beat on digital. It just can't. Maybe you could have 24 channels of Pacific Microsonics converters for, $150,000. I mean, I think that maybe if you had an unlimited $1 million budget, you could probably put together a digital, workstation that was comparable. But I don't see why we need to. I don't see why we need to be so silly about it. You know what I mean? Like, we know, like, organic strawberries taste delicious. Do we really have to like debate? You know what I mean? It's like it's there. It's in front of us. You know what I mean? Like, and artists, like, there's enough things that you have to worry about other than like, is your recording and is everything going to translate downstream, regardless of whether you take your half-inch taped Bernie Grunman and have him cut a vinyl, master to be sent to RTI for 180 gram pressing, or you have a simple one-pass conversion at a good mastering house from half-inch tape to a 16-bit 44.1 CD. Not ideal, but it sounds fucking good. It can sound really, really good. So, yeah, we enforce tape recording.
So
I think that the first thing that really anyone would hear in the difference, again, between very high quality analog recording and very high quality digital recording, and I would argue that this, like, people get caught up in this, well, what about if I listen to stuff on my iPhone, and what if I, bring it down to a 192 MP3, like, it doesn't, those things don't matter, because the resolution all the way upstream, let's say that you're reading the New York Times, the print edition. I know this is a really far-fetched, idea.
Whatever works, we all read the New York Times.
Yeah, let's just say for whatever reason you're stuck buying the print edition of the New York Times. And there on the, front of the art section, there's a reproduction, and I guess it's 150, I don't know what they use, but of a Cartier-Bresson photograph. And I would just strongly argue that that photograph, which is probably incredibly technically beautiful, you're seeing a so far downstream version of that, so compressed, so really limited, it's still beautiful. There's some impact that gets through to you. And you can, there's a million layers. I've been out in the room in the middle of an amazing performance, and then you come back behind the speakers. Shit, these are like paper, cones trying to imitate it's ridiculous. The whole idea of it is absurd. And so you're already one layer back. The idea, though, is to reduce the damage and to maximize the impact. The first thing. So I just want to say that's how I discount what happens later on. So we're just talking about at the point of recording. The first thing that happens. Analog has such a better and more natural and extended top end. Digital is fucking terrible sounding on the top. I don't know if shit is square waving. I don't know what's happening. I don't know if converters are lopping all this stuff off after 20, 22, 25K. I don't know. I really just, it doesn't, I don't care. All those technical questions are irrelevant to me. It just sounds absolutely awful. Now, there are converters that are better. Benchmark converters are better. They're incredibly expensive. Pacific Microsonics, clearly, they're better converters. But at the standard, Lynx or Apogees, the most unnatural, stifling, suffocating top end, it just sounds downright cheap and inhuman. So, for instance, we did a Brahms trio, Opus 8, in that room a couple weeks ago. You stand out in the room and you hear this glorious, this wonderful resonance from the strings. And you don't want to lose that. You don't want to let go of that. This isn't an esoteric question. This is the feeling that there are players in a room, that there is, you have gut strings, a bow hitting gut strings. You feel it. It's a profound feeling. It's the reason why people walk into a room to see performers. And when that goes away, and it's really unnaturally, kind of hacked off, it's not acceptable. It's really not acceptable if you know the difference. And you can also just record on a tape deck for the same exact price. I would argue that recording on a tape deck is actually much faster. I say this as someone that makes a lot of money off of people going into what I call the digital black hole, where bands are caught in this editing process where they move one thing and the entire take starts to sound unstable, unnatural, and so they keep editing. They add time, and they add time, and they add time. So everything I'm saying is against my own financial interest. I actually spend a lot of money on techs and on parts for tape decks. They're very expensive things. They're esoteric. You really have to know, you have to meet the medium halfway. You have to know how to do alignments, a lot of fixes. You need to understand like how to adjust tension. You have to. There's 3 microprocessors in an 827. I have an Ampex MM1200 in my basement that I record on all the time, and that's a beast from 1979. You have to. It's like an old Chevy. I imagine. I own a Toyota Corolla. I don't really even open the hood on it. But so that would be the first thing, the loss of top end, which it's a horrifying discovery. The other thing, we'll talk about the middle at some other point, but there is just no low end that feels solid, that feels right, that feels that has any kind of impact. And I grew up on the White Album. I grew up on Quadrophenia. I grew up on Wish You Were Here. I grew up on really excellent English recordings from the late 60s and the early 70s, mid 70s. For me, those are benchmark recordings. In my own life, all I can hope to is get to 20% of that point. But if we're doing it on a computer here, and this is for I mean, we've had tons of jazz here. We've had tons of classical music. Of course, we do, rock, indie stuff. And the studio's been almost booked every day for 15 years. So this isn't, I don't say this stuff lightly. These were hard truths that were burned into my brain. And the first time that I bought Pro Tools, I was very hopeful. I love computers. I'm on my laptop and my computer at home. I own 4 computers. I love MP3s. I mean, they're a limited and portable codec that has problems, but overall you're getting something back from it. You know what I mean? Like, I can email someone a 9 meg file. It sounds pretty good. At 320, it's fine. It's not ideal. It's not. It's but that, right? You know what I mean? Like, you're getting something. You're getting a portability. You're getting a convenience for that. I don't see that with digital. I really don't. I mean, here, if you're recording at home, fuck, man, do what you got to do. But I wish someone told me this stuff a long time ago. No one told me. Engineers like to record on computers because they can control the band, they can produce, they can edit, they can have a hand in the creative process. That's number one. Number two, often engineers will have a kind of guerrilla in-the-box setup at home where it's financially in their interest to record something on Pro Tools, and then they can bring it home and, mix in an environment where they're making more money. Listen, more power to them, but for me, I'm not an engineer. I am a musician who has had a lifetime of frustration trying to translate what I was playing and what I was thinking to any kind of medium. So for me, I'm an advocate for a musician, and I would argue that my capitalist stake in the matter has just sharpened my criticism of the digital lobby. They're a lot of geniuses pooled their blood and their sweat and their neurons together for 70 years to perfect analog. And one day, a lot of geniuses are doing it for digital. One day it'll be great. But man, it's really not great now.
When they come in.
Well, I would say a big thing is that people feel that recording to tape is slower. That would be one. The second one would be, and unfortunately that's not true. I mean, it would be better for me if it were true, because then we would book more time. The digital black hole thing is real, and listen, I like the main anxiety is clearly a performance issue. I mean, this is hard to really squarely talk about with a band, but what bands are, whether they realize it or not, what they're terrified of is that their literal performance isn't good enough. That them singing their lyrics in front of a microphone isn't good enough. And they see the computer as an incredibly powerful editing tool that can, and that helps alleviate some of their anxieties. I totally understand that. But the thing that happens all the time is that a performance sounds so much better on tape. I mean, remember that a band records, then they come into the control room and then they hear it. So they're getting an instant feedback as to what's happening. And okay, at one point they realize, okay, I get it. Okay, this is a linear performance. We can punch, but it would be much better if I just play my part correctly and get it right. The first thing that happens is that people play better. The first thing that happens is people sing better. And the truth is, I mean, shit, when you punch on a Studer, there's a crossfade. Voltages ramp up and down. I mean, you can get away with murder. I mean, it's not, you're still physically doing something, so there is a barrier. but it's not destructive fidelity-wise. When you cut and paste any digital information, you lose zeros and ones. When you process anything on a computer, I mean, you hear it. You can hear it. The longer that a song is edited, it's a shitstorm. I mean, it gets worse and worse and worse. And when I hear that in the control room, and then if I think that an engineer can't tell the difference, then they're either deaf or they're willfully stupid or they don't care. All of those scare me. The thing with the performance side and the analog, I would say that the analog, terror is that they imagine that it's 1952 and that they're like staring at the horn players and the backup singers, and it's like, they're recording the half-inch tape. You know what I mean? That it's like that it's a live performance, and it's really, I mean, think of every incredibly ambitious concept album that's ever been done. I mean, it's you can get away with murder on tape. You can do whatever you want. There is very, very few limitations. We've had engineers here that, like Scott Solcher would record. He would submix, let's say like a, vocal choir or E-bowed acoustic guitars onto the half-inch tape and then spit it back in real time using timing markings onto the 24-track master. It's fast to do that, actually, and it sounds really good. So once you have in mind that you're not going to take the fidelity hit, that you're going to do it like that you're going to embrace this medium that sounds a hell of a lot better. You get fast and you get good at it, and you forget. Listen, the problem with art is not that there's too many limitations. I mean, come on, like you can do anything that you want. I mean, it's 2012. Even with all of these insane boxes that we have, like there's so much possibility in here. We learn stuff every day, so that's not really really where we have like hiccups. I mean, it just has to do with the impact of a performance, getting that down right. When you hear a good singer and it's reproduced well, it has an emotional draw that trumps anything, I think. So we record on 2-inch tape here. We record at 30 inches per second, which on any reel gives you 16 minutes, 40 seconds, 41 seconds. We mix down to half-inch tape, which is a 2-track master. That is your final mix down. We don't even give digital copies to bands because we don't trust mastering engineers. I know that sounds terrible, but we really don't. I mean, we archive stuff, but when we send bands to master, we just give them half-inch tapes because we've caught a few mastering engineers mastering from digital files. And once the guy said, well, we checked both, and we really thought the digital file sounded better. And I was like, you're fucking insane, dude. Like, forget it. You know what I mean? Because it's fast. Digital's fast. It's cheap. It's like, it's convenient. So on a 2-inch reel, first off, to go back about how we provide free-inch tape. So we have right now 78 reels of 2-inch tape. We get tape all the time that's either been recorded on once. Sometimes we get tape that isn't recorded on at all. Sometimes it's been recorded on 3 or 4 times, but it doesn't have splices on it. We get tape from studios that have shut down. Studios are constantly shutting down because there's too many of them, and because people, especially wealthy people, think that it would be really fun to hang out with a bunch of like creative types, and it's not that fun. I mean, it's fun, but it's like the hassle of dealing with the the ever atrophying infrastructure that we spoke about, and also of course, any artist has unreasonable expectations. They should. I mean, that's, part of being an artist is being a difficult personality type, both to yourself and to others. And I don't begrudge artists that at all. But I understand that personality type. So we get a lot of free tape from studios that are shutting down on the idea that, hey, you're giving tape to a public lending library. We do not rent this tape or sell it to bands. A lot of bands still buy their own tape. It's very expensive. I would say about $280, $290 a reel. So you can see that would really add up for a band's budget. Excuse me. And so on that tape you have 24 tracks. It seems limited, but it's really not limited. Once we got a mix project from a very, very well-known mix engineer, extremely famous mix engineer. It was recorded on Pro Tools, and so we do outside. Probably 10% of what we do is we do outside Pro Tools mixing for people because they want to run it through this beautiful, discrete Neve console. And it will sound better. At some point you feel like you're reanimating a corpse, but what are you gonna do? So this mix project had about 120 tracks of digital information, and so there'd be like kick drum, beater side, kick drum, resonant side, kick drum, back 2 feet, bass, DI'd, bass not DI'd, bass through SansAmp distortion pedal. I mean, it was like so redundant and, in theory, great. Why not? But you would solo each track, and it sounded like fucking shit. I mean, it's like you cannot slice your brain into 120 little slivers. I mean, the more stuff you pile on, it'd be like saying, Jason, come over for dinner tonight. I'm going to make you a 60-course meal. You'd be like, I'm not so sure about that. You have to keep things reasonable and simple. And what 24 tracks does is that there's a tremendous amount of self-editing that happens. And it is incredibly powerful. Not only does each individual track sound a lot better, if you're recording a drum set, we have there's a very few number of engineers that work here. It's a very fixed system here. There's 4 house engineers: Ian, Jay, Jacob, Jamie. They're fantastic engineers. I've been collecting and culling engineers for 15 years. We have collectively, we don't enforce any rules, but collectively we've kind of made a decision that we should learn how to put 5 microphones on a drum set max and have it sound fantastic. So we've figured it out. It takes a long time to do these things. It's hard to be simple. And it has to do then with balancing the instrument and having the drummer balance the instruments. And, you have to actually look, in front of the microphones for some of your answers, which is much more healthy and organic anyways. And so you're looking at a drum image of about 5 microphones, and then you have 19 tracks. Man, we just produced a record, this total genius from Philly named Strand of Oaks, Tim Showalter. There was it's a full band. It's a full, fantastic sounding rock. It's kind of like early Neil Young era singer-songwriter stuff. Fantastic. Maybe 18, 19 tracks a song. We just never felt the need to go over that. There's many, many overdubs on those songs. So the landscape, the terrain feels limitless at 24 tracks. But bands are often freaked out because to them, they've recorded in a studio where there's 17 tambourines, and then you solo them up and you're like, first off, this sounds terrible. And why? Why do we have this? So, in regards to one thing I didn't mention in regards to analog digital stuff, I've spent in my life at least over $100,000 on digital workstations. Minimum, probably more, much more than that, which is just horrible for me to think about. But so I don't criticize digital lightly. I don't say these things jeering at other people. I don't think it's easy to run a studio, and I don't think it's easy to make records at all. It has created thousands of hours of terror in my own life, so I don't say these things lightly, and I don't say them with any pleasure. So I've been burned as much as anybody in this world. But it would be very, very dishonest for me not to be clear about what I've learned. And I don't care. It doesn't matter to me if people... I mean, I really mean this sincerely. I don't care if people believe what I'm saying or agree with me. It doesn't matter. All of these decisions are very, very personal. And there is a very arbitrary component to art, which is fine. It's good. I think it's actually, it's a good thing. It's a healthy thing. But it would be very dishonest for me not to be clear about the things that I learned. And the problems, the arguments, they don't stop there. I mean, it's not about just turning on, powering up a Studer 827. That's the beginning of your problems. I mean, then you're going to get into, how does a Josephson 715 match up with a Neve 1089 or a 4-cell SMP2? What's the difference between a GML Nova compressor and an Electronics 1176? I mean, you're going to be mired in this stuff forever if you care about fidelity. But shit, man, the beginning point is, if you hand me a strawberry that you got from Safeway and it's like this, as John Darnielle would say, the size of a baby's fist, this like bulbous, kind of like pale red with a huge, kind of white nub at the end, and it's a tasteless fucking crime against humanity. And tell me that that's a strawberry, because it was grown in a field under a huge plastic tarp where they pumped in chemicals. That's not a strawberry. It isn't. You have not tasted a strawberry if you think that's a strawberry. Well, if you grew up on tape decks, fuck, man, Ampex kills 827. I mean, we're not even at the top of the heap of analog machines. You can't run an MM1200 in a studio. It'd be like going on tour in a mid-70s, Ford Econoline, if they made them in the mid-70s. It's ridiculous, but the difference between an 827 and a tweaked-out, good-sounding Pro Tools rig it's a fucking Grand Canyon. I mean, that's the truth. Well, I think one thing that's very interesting about tape, and this was told to me by Walter Sear, who used to own Sear Sound, is dead now. He's an absolutely legendary person. Really a surprising, funny, charming, cynical, and compassionate person. He was very helpful to me when I opened the studio. I just called him randomly looking for long frame patch cables. These basically cables for this brass Neve Bay. And he became very, very helpful to me, and he really guided a lot of the early purchases I made. He sold me some passive cinema filters and was just really helpful in helping me acquire gear. One thing he told me, which stuck with me for a long time, he said that there's a problem with recording instruments that goes something like this. a lot of instruments have front-end transient information. That it's information that's so fast and really so unreasonable that it won't really be picked up in a VU meter. So this is a VU meter right there. Those are PPM meters, which are, I believe, more sensitive to picking up transient information. Let's say you hit a snare drum. You hit it, and let's say someone hit a snare drum right here. We would both be like, dude, stop doing that. It's really, really loud. What happens when you hit a snare drum is that there's actually like 40, 50 dB of transient information that just blasts through the microphone. It's unnecessary, it's unrecordable, and it's too much. There's too much of a wide dynamic range. I mean, if you're looking at a waveform, it might go like this. Well, and the honest truth is we don't want the top of that transient information. We can't use it. We don't need it. It's one reason why good tube microphones can be very, very useful is that they lop off that transient information. They police it in sometimes a very musical way. That's the reason why we like the 4-cell M2A tube pre. It's why we like Fern tube stuff. You hear it. I mean, it polices transient information. Hell, a vocalist. It's amazing. We were recording a singer the other day, and we used a tube pre. We could immediately hear that front-end transient information disappear or become. I mean, again, policed is a good word because you have to. You have to control the dynamic range of instruments in a musical way. So your cops can't just be like, hitting people over the head. It has to be subtle crowd control. Tubes do it. Transformers do it. Good transformers. Tape does it. So the interesting thing is that a tape deck is in its own right a zero-attack compressor. At its best, it's a very, very high-quality zero-attack compressor. And it's weird, people, just like they say, oh, I love analog, I love recording on my TSR-8, people always say to me, oh, I love analog, it's so fat, and you can get that tape sound. And I'm always like, what's the tape sound? Tell me, because I don't know what that means. But, the one thing it does, which is very, very subtle, which is not what people are saying when they're... I think that when people say their tape sound, they're maybe thinking back to when they had like a Tascam 4-track cassette recorder and it's just kind of distorting. And hey, man, I'm a big fan of that too, but, that's not really the tape sound. That's just like, cheap ICs exploding in a 4-track recorder. So when you're recording to tape, you do get transient policing of the highest order for every instrument. And the net result is that music has a place, it has a foundation, it's sitting on a floor. You record like an old-timey band and you put up the faders and it sounds like, okay, I hear the banjo, I hear all these things as if I'm standing in the room. I don't need to recompress everything. I don't need to process everything. It makes sense. The stereo image makes sense to me. This is a big deal. It's one reason why people are constantly editing on the computer. There's a dynamic range problem that has to be dealt with, and compressors can't always do it in a way that is non-destructive. So subtle amounts of tape compression, and I mean very subtle amounts of tape compression, are really, really beneficial. And that's something that I didn't understand until it was pointed out to me.
Okay, well, great.